Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, the esteemed participants
Приступаем к работе, да.
on the global connectivity agenda within the International Symposium, the post-COVID era, redesigning and redefining the global economy. My name is Ekaterina, co-partner of IEC International, a consulting company based in France, Paris, and I will be chairing this session. And I'm really honored to present the participants of this session today, who are Mr. Gennady Bessonov, the Secretary General of the Coordinating Council on Trans-Eurasian Transportation, Mr. Leslie Marsdorp, Vice President and CFO of New Development Bank, Mr. Richard Morton, the Secretary General of International Post Community Systems Authority, Mr. Jean-Pierre Loubenou, Honorary Director General of International Union of Railways, Mr. Xavier van den Papen, the Director for New Silk Road Development at SNCF Press. Today, we are going to discuss quite a complicated and comprehensive subject of the global connectivity, and to start with the ideas before listening to the presentations of our esteemed participants, let me kindly present you several ideas that could be a basis for discussion. If you allow me to share the screen, I will do it. Do you see the presentation right now? Because I'm not sure. Yes, I guess you do. I will just try to switch it. Great. Hope you now can both see and hear me. And I'm going to present several theses on the connectivity as possibly as a priority resource for global economic recovery. I'm going to speak more about railways this time because first, this is maybe one of the first events organized by the Reinventing Bretton Woods Committee in partnership with the St. Petersburg Institute of Economics and Harburg Institute of International Economics, as well as with other organizations. So this is maybe one of the large presented here, and nothing new in it actually, because the 2021 is the European Year of Railways, and railways are more about continental connectivity, while maritime transportation is more about this intercontinental. So actually, just a few ideas on what we have this year and what will be the subject for the discussion. In the beginning of the previous year, we published a forecast on the impact of double crisis, the economic, the one that was expected long before, and the COVID-19 crisis on the international Euro-Asian railway transportation. And we actually predicted a high synchrony of services and the demand for fast, cheap, reliable transportation, but as well as the concrete dynamics based on the economic forecasts that were issued by that period. This was later on republished by international platforms, also by the United Nations, and now at the beginning of this year we can actually see that the forecast has come true. And what we see is a great asynchrony of services, which actually leads us to the idea of inequality of existing connectivity right now. This was, but it is also true for the maritime one right now. The market players are aware that there is a lack of containers that we observe because they actually all went from China to Europe in case for Euro-Asian links, and they do not come back. And many of the market players are actually asking why. Who would have known? We couldn't have predicted it, but that's not true. Wait, just look at the structure of traded commodities between Europe and Asia, and this can never be matched. This is also always different, and the difference of structure by itself defines the imbalance in transportation links. There are several solutions for this thing. The first one, the hardware option, is to develop actually a development of a balanced network, ensuring combination of transit flows with exports and imports, and thus forming the kind of ocean-to-ocean corridors. This is the case of Europe and Asia, but it is also true for other continents as well. And this could be a possible solution to cope with inequality of flows in different directions and to ensure a kind of more sustainable connectivity. But this is really a hardware option because it requires a lot of investment. And how can we proceed with the investment in case we are not aware of what we are waiting for in the upcoming years due to the unpredictable post-pandemic situation? But here comes another option. Another option is the digital connectivity or e-connectivity. And taking into account that change in macroeconomic prerequisites are not favorable for investments in hard infrastructure, maybe the investments in soft connectivity can become substitutional. The e-connectivity actually is the construction of information links and balances, which definitely result in higher resilience of transportation system. And actually, they have the same type of impact as the hard connectivity, that is to say, the economies of time and the economies of cost. And in 2019, just before the pandemic, at the very end of 2019, the UIC and IEC study on Eurasian corridors actually modeled the impact of both hard connectivity investments and soft connectivity investments. And it turned out that the role of digital connectivity can be even higher than the input of the trade dynamics into the overall transportation flows and also in their allocation by existing routes. That is true for railways, but that is definitely also the case for maritime transportation, because for Euro-Asian links, the railways, they hold a little bit less than 3%. For 2020, that might be about 5%, while all the rest goes by sea. So actually, the idea for the future to be discussed today is that connectivity is not about moving cargo or people, in case we are talking about passenger connections from point to point. It is actually about linking societies, economies, financing, technologies. And so, while taking decisions on the further investments or on further enhancements of connectivity infrastructure, maybe the economic effects should be considered prior to volumes, which is the case right now, because right now, when considering the efficiency of investments, we are usually talking about the volumes that will be transported, and not about the economic impact. But as you can see, this impact can be direct, as it was modeled by IEC in 2019. Actually, the transportation enhancements can really impact on economic growth, or in the worst case, they can at least slow down the economic drop. So the questions are today that I propose us to discuss, both the participants of this session, their presentations, and also, of course, the participants of the symposium. You are welcome to write your questions in the chat. The questions are as follows. The connectivity is a resource to foster economic growth, as it was just shown, or to slow down the economic drop. And digital connectivity is actually a new, highly required tool within this resource. Do you think it can become a remedy for ocean-to-ocean connectivity in the times of the pandemic, or will it be not enough? The investments and actions. Should digital connectivity be prioritized by development institutions and transport organizations? And should it be assessed from the economic point of view prior to investing? And another very specific question about trusted networks and trusted environments as a part of connectivity. Can such kind of environment substitute the physical connectivity and ensure balance in flows and actions? Is it possible that transportation and financial blockchains can be a solution against inequalities in connectivity? These are the thoughts that I propose you for the beginning of this session, and I'm honored to chair today. And just before passing the floor to the student participants, I would love to remind you several house rules. So first, please, the time for each presentation is up to 10 minutes. Student participants who are not talking today, but who would like, or who are talking today, who would like to ask the questions, please feel free to do it in the symposium chat. You can find it below. And I think that we will be able to answer the questions right after all the presentations. We will have enough of time for it. But please keep to your time limit and be aware that we have to finish in about 1 hour. So now, after my long speech, I'm sorry for that. I'm happy to pass the floor to the participants of this session and to discuss maybe the questions that I have raised, maybe other ones, maybe to propose new ones for discussion. First, I would love to start with Mr. Xavier Wadenpeppen, because SNCF has been establishing a connectivity within New Silk Road, because actually France was not a part of it. And starting from the very end of the last year, if I'm not mistaken, there is actually a national program in France on freight revival and on establishment of new international and national transportation links. What changes do you expect in the upcoming years? What is your position on the future of your actions, on your response to the existing challenges from both transportation and maybe macroeconomic perspectives? So, dear Xavier, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot. Maybe you can share my presentation. Yes, so it's true. In fact, France is not really in the New Silk Road, railway New Silk Road. It's quite normal because you know that the trains of New Silk Road are in fact a corridor between north of Europe and China. So it was logical for China to begin by the main pipe of exchange, so north of Europe, with all the ports of Hamburg, Rotterdam, Antwerp. So, but now it's yes, it was a decision of some Chinese partner to create a direct connection, because maybe now the step of development of trains of New Silk Road is a sort of consolidation. And what you explain in your presentation is totally true. That means, what is the economic model? Frankly speaking, SNCF, we was not absolutely interested by the competition in the train and to enter in this market, in this low-cost market, which could be the rail transportation, because SNCF is also a railway carrier in Poland, in Germany, under the subsidiary of Captrain. But this market is now really new. So if you can show the next page, we have in front of us a system of connectivity which will create, everybody knows that this will create a dynamic which will not be only with China, but also will create a link and dynamic with Russia, with Central Asia and Europe. So what will be the technology within the 10 next years? What will be the model of economic development between mainly China and Europe? We know that the program of China is to maybe stop to be the specialists of the low cost and cheap goods. They will maybe stop to have production of pine trees. But you know that China 2025, if you go by internet, this model of economy of China is to develop the industry and the high tech and the high value goods. So for us, for the train, what can we do? My opinion, why I say that we don't want to be a player in the low-cost system transportation. It's because we need revenue for investment. I will show you after a sort of checklist of perspectives of new technology for the train. So my opinion is within 10 days, we will have 10 years, sorry, we will have maybe trains, freight trains, with a transit time of 10 days between China and Europe. We know everybody the possibility of connectivity, high tech, etc. So the rail freight transportation in Europe, in China, had not the investment of passenger trains. And also, we must to consider that now for some countries, especially also in Europe, we must also to consider that we have now responsibility in social and environmental questions. So this can create a new model and must create a new model. So there is here a link. We will not see and watch this link, but if you are interested, but everybody knows already these questions. With B4IG and with this new project of economy in the world, so we must also consider this. So if you can show the next page, just a list of new possibilities by rail. So infrastructure, we know that there is questions of speed of trains, questions of security, of course. But if you consider that the transit in Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus was 8 years ago, at the beginning of the train's new Silk Road, the transit time was more or less 8 days. Actually, the three railway undertakings propose a transit time of 5 days, 6 days between Chinese border and Polish border. So, and we have also capacity to improve this system. We know that we must also keep in objective that European Union wants to have a clean system, economic system within 30 years. It will be tomorrow, and China within 40 years. It will be also, we must now to prepare this. For wagons, our wagons actually are again more or less 4 wheels and a platform. We did not create real modern wagons. So this is now a program of all the railway industry. So I don't speak about containers with GPS and all the systems, the customs with quick and smart communication, etc. So I will not give you all the list, but also one of the main possibility is, I believe, within 5 years, we will be able to develop trains with variable gauge systems. So you will watch this video, this link. The prototype exists now. We are doing the program of development between Spain and France. And I think we will have the first prototype of such wagons. So just the cross-border solutions without the transloading actually, we can have 4 days, maybe 6 days less in the transit time. So this is the program which within the 5, 10, 15 years will create absolutely a revolution in the freight transportation between Asia and Europe. I am sure about this. And the last page, it's also some questions. I don't believe we will have, and I don't believe it's necessary to have autonomous trains between Asia and Europe. But this is also one video where we can see the complete transformation, and this will have consequences. So more or less, if we already do 10 or 20% of this program within the next years, we have real big capacities to develop the competitiveness, the transit time, and the possibility to create a new system between all regions. So what I want to say is, we know that trains with New Silk Road exist because China decided to give high-level subsidies. My quick calculation is in 2019, 2 years ago, the amount of subsidies was $800 million of subsidies. So you imagine this level of subsidies for investment, we can create a real revolution in the freight rail transportation. And we have to be ready for the end of the subsidies. So within 2 or 3 years, the price by train will be more or less $8,000 per container. And this, we can propose this price to the market if we have more good transit time, more quality, more capacities in the border. So it's what I want to say you. I will not say that every day we have this program in front of us, but we know that we must to develop this development, to this capacities, this investment. Yes, and this is, I believe, it's our future. I hope it's a future soon and not in the long term view. But yes, that's what I wanted to show you.
Thank you so much, Xavier, for this interesting presentation. Regarding the subsidies, maybe the question and the answer to the question on the subsidies was on my slides, because this actually fosters the economic growth, and that is the reason for it. Or maybe the idea is not to refuse the subsidized transportation, but vice versa, to put the efforts together to subsidize the transportation and the development of transport infrastructure in case it can help us to slow down the economic growth or to recover faster. So now I'm passing the floor to Mr. Jean-Pierre Lebenoux, the Honorary Director General of the International Union of Railways. Jean-Pierre, you have a large experience in putting together railway and societal issues for many years on all continents. And I remember us organizing the event with the motto linking railways and societies. What is your feeling on the role of digital connectivity? And could this be a tool to enhance the existing links? Or maybe this is something coming apart from technologies. What are your ideas and what is your vision of the post-pandemic era? Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katerina. Hello, everyone from Paris, Dobre Utro, St. Petersburg. Well, I think this is a very large question and a very interesting one. You know, in this century, we are facing many challenges. One of them, as Jeremy Rifkin once said as a visionary, is this fourth industrial revolution called the digital connectivity revolution. In this 21st century, I can see 5 major changes which are all impacted by connectivity. The first one is the notion even of transport, which has changed. We don't talk about transport anymore. It has become mobility, but we don't talk about mobility anymore. We talk about accessibility, which means that this interoperability has become intermodality and has now become integration into logistic change, either for freight or for passenger. And this change must overcome all frontiers and all barriers, whether technical, with change of gauges and everything, physical, modal, legal, and even cultural. This is what, when I was UIC, I called the SISICOM syndrome. SISICOM meaning sustainable, integrated, connected chain of mobility. And of course, rail, we are many railway people in this panel, but rail is or can be the backbone of this chain and improves the management of interfaces. It becomes a crucial point for rail to integrate this connectivity revolution into every bit of its organizations. The second challenge is growing urbanization, fast growing urbanization. 2 billion people will be urbanized in the next 10 years. 45 cities will be more than 20 million inhabitants, which will increase by 300% the CO2 emissions. And with an urban congestion costing a lot of money to societies, which means that intelligent connectivity is the key. And here we have the input of the role of the IoTs for the interface of this first and last mile mobility, again, either for goods or for people. The third change is that this philosophical approach in the 20th century, pushed by the European Commission, of modal competition has transformed into an approach of complementarity. And this is again this change of mobility with new interconnected services to improve their productivity, which is key, and there is still a lot to improve in productivity. If you just take freight, for instance, as Xavier mentioned, the cost of logistics for container is 18%, the value of the goods, where it should be 1 or 2%. So there is a lot of margin of added value to gain there through, again, connectivity systems. The fourth change is, of course, this digital input with 3 key factors. Productivity, as I just said, but also predictability and connectivity. This will improve the capacity of the trains or any chains and the services. We need, of course, to accelerate time with better reactivity, and this through data treatment. And this is the precise definition of connectivity. In this big data world, everything needs to be conceived and anticipated cleverly to be connected properly. 5 change is, of course, and we saw a couple of maps in your presentations, is the new corridors, whether it's east to west with the Trans-Sib and the Silk Roads, or north to south, which we shouldn't forget as well. The Trans-Siberian routes and the Silk Roads represent 55% of the world GDP. They cross 65 countries and they impact the world population. And the blockchain, which is one of the questions you have in your list, Ekaterina, will be crucial for transparency and traceability. Railways must seize this digital opportunity to be, as I mentioned, the backbone, not the only carrier, but the backbone of this system, of this sustainable chain of logistic mobility. In 2030, this is tomorrow, no, not even 10 years ahead of us, 100 billion IoTs, Internet of Things, will be available. The cloud, the machine learning, the blockchain, the artificial intelligence, the quantum computing will bring in the next 10, 15 years the equivalent of 10 to 15 trillion dollars growth in the GDP. And this in services, in intermodal interfaces, in better management of capacity, which is actually crucial for every operator, for new communication and signaling systems. Well, this is not a dream. It's already becoming slowly, maybe too slowly, part of our daily reality. In 2014, this is not long ago, there was between East and Western markets, approximately, Xavier can correct or Gennady can update my figures, but 300 container trains. In 2020, there is 4,000. The market share of rail will grow from 1% to 4%. And this is not a small market. The exchanges between East and West represent Eastern Europe markets and Western Europe markets and Eastern Asian zone represents approximately $1,000 billion every year. So we are talking here of big money. And this actually could even double in the next 10 years if we continue to see at the same pace, at the same rhythm, the growth expected in the ASEAN and Chinese countries. So I tried in a few minutes, I think I respected my time slot, to answer some of your 3 questions, Ekaterina. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And I'll be ready for questions if any.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. We already have a question in our chat, but I propose us first giving the floor to all of the esteemed participants of today's session, and afterwards we will come back to questions and answers. And thank you for this wonderful painting of St. Petersburg. I know that is your own painting, and this is a contribution to today's symposium. Thank you so much. But I think that we are actually thinking too much to the railway world, and right now maybe a good idea would be to switch to the maritime transportation supports that are actually part of both maritime and inland transportation. And we are moving on to Mr. Richard Morton, the Secretary General of the International Port Community Systems Authority. That is actually a very interesting organization putting together the kind of digital interaction of many stakeholders and working with the idea of a trusted network. So Richard, could you please tell us more about the trusted network and trusted environment as a new option of connectivity? Maybe some links, but usually about when we are talking about trusted networks, we link it to the financial issues, to cryptocurrencies and similar things. What is this idea similar for transportation? Do you think that creation of either trusted networks or trusted third parties or something like this can impact on the connectivity? Can these digital solutions be a part of the connectivity agenda of the future? Please give us your insights from the International Port Community System Association.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think we have to look at 3 key things, and I think colleagues will share my slide shortly. And just going back to the previous speaker who's been mentioning blockchains, let's remember blockchain is just a way of enabling the communication between parties. It's not the solution, it is a way to do it. You still need agreement between the parties. You still need to share, have contractual agreements. So just because you have a technology doesn't mean you're going to be sharing data across the world. So what we see are some 3 key areas, and I'll just share my slide to make it easier for you. We see 3 key areas. From us as an association, we have over 50 members in 50 countries, not just seaports. Many of our members deal with inland terminals, border crossings, rail terminals, airports. And exchanging data between the stakeholders in the logistics chains is not new. This has been happening for 40, 50 years in some cases. But there are 3 key things you have to look at. Collaboration. Everybody talks about collaboration, but it's about trust. It's not about technology. It's about people. If the people don't agree, it doesn't matter what the technology you have, it's not going to work. And if we look at collaboration, it's about collaboration between countries, trust between customs authorities, trust between governments to share data outside their own borders in order to facilitate that trade. And part of that is all around the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, which most countries have signed up to. There are many processes in that which will help simplify trade for the traders managed by the governments. However, it's not just about the collaboration, it's about trust. And port community systems are called community systems because it brings the public and the private together to share in a confidential way. They're governance platforms, but they allow information to be shared between parties, including the rail industry. All of the port community systems where rail is significant are sharing information. Port of Los Angeles, all of the information for the rail is being managed through the port to be loading the trains to destination of where their goods are going on those trains. But you want to achieve collaboration, it's about standards and digital maturity. If you're transporting goods across the world, whether it's from China by rail or by sea, both ends need to have a certain level of digital maturity. There's no point that one end doesn't and is being done in paper. It can be done and it does work. And also they need to talk the same language, the same standards. You hear a lot of talk, there are no standards out there. There are standards out there and they've been there for many, many years. And that's the key to it, is making sure there is digital maturity along the chain. For your Euro-Asian rail, you need to make sure all the countries are able to exchange data in an agreed format, or at least harmonise, so you're all using the same. A container is a container. And those standards are there. And you need to ensure that digital maturity, that not just the authorities or the rail companies, but your users, the freight companies, the freight forwarders, the agents, the customs brokers, the agents are all involved. And then we look at globally networked platforms. There are many platforms out there for many different things, but they need to work together. Community systems are based on a trusted party, sharing data, exchanging data between multiple other stakeholders, public and private, in order to ensure the speedy movement of goods, the optimal movement of goods with minimal processes. But if you can have a port community system in Germany talking to a port community system in China, the supply chain becomes visible. We already have that with members in China, both working with Alibaba and Logink, the national Chinese logistics platform that has a majority of the rail information coming out of China. And how do we share that data so the European parties are able to know that those goods are on their way, the customs cleared, and they're moving through? So it's about network neutral platforms. There are many platforms emerging out there. Are they neutral? Are they led by a technology provider? Are they led by a shipping line? Are they led by an individual airline or an airport? And if that's the case, are they neutral? That is the problem that you're finding, is that there are many platforms, they're not all neutral. As IPSCA, we developed a network of trusted networks, which is a governance platform between ports, between single windows, to allow the platforms who are already trusted at a local level to share and exchange data with another platform who can then send that information to its user. The reason for that is the biggest problem for cross-border trade is not technology. The biggest problem is the agreements, the legal aspects. Who do you agree with? How do you write those contracts? How do you agree the fee negotiation? And we've taken the simple concepts that we use every day of using APIs to download and agree a standard terms and conditions and move that into the transport industry. We currently have 10 participants covering over 40 ports in about 15 countries, starting to get involved for both sea, air, rail, and we're developing new aspects as we go. Again, proof of concept at the minute, but again, it's about sharing that data. So when you're looking at how do you improve the digital connectivity, people through collaboration, standards, digital maturity leading to globally networked platforms is the key. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was maybe the number one idea that I would like to emphasize is that we should not be only technology driven. This is the technologies, even if they exist, they are useful. This is not the number one. Just still think about the agreements, the governance, and the ideas that we put inside. Maybe coming back to the rebel perspective, Mr. Gennady Besonov, first of all, congratulations, because today in Russia it is the Diplomat Day, and let me congratulate you with it. You are a Secretary General of a really coordinating council, unifying, putting together the businesses and the authorities, rail, maritime, and many other options. What is your vision for regarding the redefining and redesigning the global economy from the transportation domain? Please, the floor is yours, and I kindly ask the organizers to put on the presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay. First of all, dear friends, I'm very participate today in the cooperation issues. And now? Сейчас?
Слышно.
Хорошо. Давайте тогда я буду говорить по-русски.
Okay, well, just advise all the participants that there is a button to ensure the simultaneous translation, and Gennady will speak in Russian. Please go on.
Хорошо.
Great.
Я очень рад
I'm happy today to be at this most representative forum. I'm happy to see my old friends and colleagues and counterparts and to exchange opinions, because one of the most important issues for us and that we are discussing today is global connectivity issue. And here I would like to begin by saying that listening to the other speakers, I listened to Mr. Hazin, a well-known economist in Russia, who described the situation that defines today the current state of affairs. And the topic of COVID cannot be considered outside the context of the context of what we have today in the world. And this, unfortunately, is not so optimistic. I mean, what's happening in the world, because the world is in the economic and social and financial crisis. And the pandemic is just exacerbating these problems which we have today. And a bit later, I will definitely try to describe the situation with the transportation. Still, I would like to first draw a sort of a general picture of what's happening, because it has been said quite correctly by the previous speaker that the different technologies that the world has invented and what we can implement cannot work without a common approach, because we are in a sort of a systemic contradiction situation. On the one hand, technologies can be introduced and can be implemented only if there is a mutual adoption of these technologies by different countries. And it's obvious there is no contradiction in that. But on the other hand, we are in a state and in the world where the national interests quite often are manifested through national egoism. And we can see that the processes that occur in different countries are too much politicized. And this does not make it possible to apply these obvious measures and solutions for the world to become more advanced from the technological point of view. And that's a serious problem for today, quite a challenge indeed. And along with the achievements that we have today, technological achievements, we are living in a situation when economic sanctions are there. And how can we correlate the economic sanctions and the common technologies promotion? Now, this is something we need to consider. Now, if we look at the pandemic, could we have the second slide of mine? Right. So, what does the pandemic show? What does the process demonstrate? On the one hand, we can see that the transport system has been more prepared than other systems to counteract the pandemic, and particularly if we take the land transportation and the railroad transport. At this period of time, they actually increased because they demonstrated readiness and their technological advantage in the context of the emerging problems. The next slide, please. And here you can see that, in principle, even this difficult period has led to the growth of transportation, transit, cargo transportation has increased. Jean-Pierre mentioned that the supply chains began to work together, so to speak. And here in this slide, you can see how the corridors worked, the international corridors worked. They also demonstrate considerable growth of transportation by 44%, 25%. So this indicates that technologically we're ready. We're capable of overcoming any difficulties. And indeed, if we take the future and we look into the future of our planet, our common future, railroad transport today is the most progressive from the point of view of the environmental protection on the planet, because the emissions on railroads are the lowest. And here in this slide, you can see the comparison of different transport modes. You can see that we should really think of the transportation modes that do not work negatively on the balance of life and on nature. And that's what we're going to do in the future. The next slide demonstrates what we're doing to do in the coordinating council. We're quite aware of the problems. And if we take the national interests, then you can see over here that today we do not have any problems with transportation. Today we can see that COVID had an impact on the following. About 40% of the shipped volumes are not properly agreed upon by the Chinese counterparts of ours. This is associated with the pandemic. On the other hand, we're unable to tackle some of the issues because of the legal aspects and standards. For example, the imputed tax. So this cannot be accepted by many, by the international document, by the customs all over the world. This is a simple thing indeed, but this is something that could help to reduce the time needed for processing. We mentioned blockchain. Indeed, blockchain is just a method, a way, a technology. But how can we introduce it if blockchain is not accepting the correct type of data? The countries need to share the data, and this is what we believe to be most important today. We said that we are thinking of how the transportation is going to be carried out in Europe and in Asia in the forthcoming period. In the short-term period, well, of course, well, could we see the next slide? We have a whole set of different mechanisms that we can apply in order to tackle these issues. And it seems to me that we're quite capable of doing that. But on the other hand, as Jean-Pierre said, he spoke about the fourth revolution. The revolution should be the fifth one, indeed, because we should step away from the technologies introduced in the 19th century. In the 21st century, we can hardly answer and respond to the challenges, economic challenges we face today. We need to build new railroads. And, well, of course, it's a serious task and of an international scope. The construction of a road in the corridor China-Europe. No, it's a project that by its importance is equal to the Suez Canal. And these matters are all interconnected. And it seems to me that today, transport, first of all, railroads, among other modes, demonstrate that cooperation, interaction, is mutually beneficial, and we all should get rid of the political aspects that prevail over the economic ones, and through a joint effort, we should deal with the issues that we all have to work on in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Frank presentation. It was very interesting. I think we are going to discuss it a little bit later. And now we are moving away from transportation organizations, authorities, and representatives. And we are switching to the position of financial development institution. Dear Leslie, Mr. Leslie Marsdorp, the Vice President and CFO of New Development Bank. What is the position of financial institutions? We have just heard a lot from transportation domain, but it is you who actually support the activities of countries, the investments, the development programs. Do you consider connectivity as worth investing in the short to mid-term period? And what about digital connectivity? Is it worth talking at all? What are your plans, expectations, and maybe concerns? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katerina. It's a real honor to be amongst the panelists to talk about this very important subject. Let me start out by saying that connectivity, whether it be physical connectivity that enabled to connect global supply chains that have been the bedrock of globalization, as well as digital connectivity, is at the heart of economic growth and raising the productivity levels of our economies. Multilateral banks are banks that finance traditionally infrastructure, and under infrastructure, you typically have energy as one of the core focus areas, because without power, an economy cannot really flourish. Transport is normally the second most important sector that we invest in. Digital infrastructure has become, over the last 10, 15 years or so, one of the core areas that multilateral banks finance because of the multiplier development impacts that digital connectivity has on an economy. As you know, digital connectivity can enable a country to go up the developmental path, to skip if you like, certain stages of development if you adopt the most modern technologies that are available to modernize your healthcare sector, your education sector, your financial sector, agriculture, and so on. So the first point I'd like to make is that multilateral banks, like the New Development Bank, play a very critical role in financing the kinds of activities that my colleague spoke about over the last half an hour or so. The second point I'd like to make is maybe just to say something about the New Development Bank, which is an interesting organization in the sense that we have 5 member countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The bank will also expand this year, but in these 5 countries, we have in terms of our total volumes of lending over the last 5 years, we have committed $26 billion into infrastructure in the 5 countries. Transport is the second largest sector. We are upgrading a significant port in Durban in South Africa, for example. We have invested or co-financing the metro in Mumbai. Mumbai is one of the largest cities in India, for example, and we're doing multiple energy and transport projects across the other BRICS countries. What has happened as a result of COVID, we are in fact deepening our commitment to regional connectivity and integrating countries in the regions, because regional infrastructure is very essential to stimulate economic growth, as I mentioned earlier on. What COVID has done, it has really entrenched the importance of digital connectivity. As you know, everybody is saying today that one of the spin-offs of the COVID crisis will be an acceleration in everything digital. So we will see over the next number of years, and we certainly anticipate that we will commit a lot more resources to enable the movement of a lot of companies to adopt business models that are more appropriate for the digital era. The other aspect that I think we should not lose sight of, which haven't been touched on much yet today, is the area around sustainability. So we combine, in the way that we look at our lending activities, we look very closely at the imperative to green our economies, at the issues around managing climate change. And now increasingly, as you know, most of the G20 economies, and our 5 countries are certainly amongst that group, have committed, as part of their commitments for COP26, a net zero by 2050 in terms of emissions. So when we look at regional integration, we also put that sort of clean and green lens onto how we look at the future. The next point I'd like to make is that there's been a couple of changes that have happened as a consequence of COVID. Multilateral banks have gone back to the drawing board to ask ourselves, how can we be more effective in funding infrastructure, including connectivity around transport infrastructure and digital and so on. We realize that governments are going to be a lot more fiscally constrained going forward. As you know, all of our countries have increased significantly their borrowings on the public debt markets, and they will be constrained from investing in infrastructure into the future because of the rising fiscal deficits. So we are changing our approach to do a lot more what we call mobilization. There's a lot of institutional investor funds, or a lot of savings, if you like, in the financial markets, which are not gainfully or productively utilized. One of the biggest paradoxes we have today, as you might know, is that we have very low, in some cases zero, and in some cases negative interest rates. So we've got large pools of capital that are invested in these very low yielding asset classes. What we would like to do is to use our funding as a bank as a catalyst to try and crowd in more funding from institutional investors into transport infrastructure, into rail, into roads, into ports, because what we can do as a multilateral bank is use our funding in such a way that we can take on the initial risk, which maybe the large institutional investors are not yet ready to take on. So there will be a shift taking place in development finance, more towards mobilization of capital. In the past, we have used our own capital to lend, to provide loans, or to provide equity, or to provide guarantees. So I made mention earlier on, for example, Katerina, that we have a portfolio of $26 billion. Most or all of that actually is funding that came from the New Development Bank for these large infrastructure projects. What we now will aim to do in all of our member countries is to bring more private sector capital on board. The final point I'd like to make is that with respect to digital infrastructure, there are sort of a couple of components. The first component is the digital foundations, or the backbone, which is just the connectivity. A number of our countries, most of the BRICS countries, have fairly high degrees of internet penetration, in the high cell phone penetration in our member countries. So we do have the ability to build, which is the second component, an ecosystem that enables the digitalization of our economies. So the basic digital foundations is what we typically invest in, but it is very important to complement that with the ecosystem for entrepreneurs, software engineers who can design the applications and so on. And then the third component that's needed is digital literacy. We need to invest more in ensuring that our populations are becoming more and more familiar with using the latest technologies available, so that you can make access to things like telemedicine, have access to mobile payments, remote learning, and so on. Countries that are able to get onto this digital wave are going to be the ones that will lead in terms of competitiveness going forward. So in short, Katerina, what I'm saying is that the New Development Bank, like all multilateral banks, we see connectivity as central to the whole imperative to deepen and strengthen infrastructure in our economies. And they're both equally important. The physical connectivity in terms of rail, transport, airports, roads, and so on, as well as digital connectivity. And we look forward to doing more lending and providing equity, both loans and equity, in the 5 BRICS countries going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for this positive information that we heard, that yes, transport infrastructure and digital connectivity are worth investing. And by the way, we do not yet know the multipliers coming from the digital transport infrastructure, because we only know that for large infrastructural projects, the multipliers are high. But for digital transport projects, we do not know yet. This is something, a kind of methodological task for all of us. So this is all with the key participants of today's session, but I see one more person has joined us. This is Mr. Edwin Perzinch, the head of Center of Transportation Services Liski of the Ukrainian Railways and the ex-president of the Latvian Railways. I'm happy to see you among the participants today, and I would like to start the questions and answers part of today's session with you, if you agree. So, Edwin, if you're okay with that, could I please start with a kind of provocative question? Because the Ukraine right now is one of the key development areas from the transportation and transit point of view, but because of the political constraints, and I'm really happy that Gennady actually mentioned this subject, because we're all talking about connectivity, about investment projects, about everything, but they are all very often kind of blocked by political decision. What is your vision on the connectivity? Do you think that, what kind of cooperation, the digital one, the traditional one, I don't know, the support from the development banks, for example, the multilateral support, what kind of cooperation could be the most beneficial for the Ukraine as a transit area?
Thank you very much, Ekaterina. Thank you very much for possibility to be there. Actually, I catch the last wagon I'm in, or the last container. Actually, Ukraine is geographically the center, and many actually corridors is going through the Ukraine as such. Today's speakers already mentioned many actually questions which actually we should solve. Digitization, first of all, we still see these connections problems. China 1520 millimeter gauge, Europe, also legal questions are. It's a political from one type is for sure it's a tough questions. On the other hand, actually always in every time in the world will be such political questions about business and transportation should solve in everything. And I would like to say that business and transportation is working actually out of this political area. For sure, there is a problems, but still, step by step, I see that cargo flows should actually goes within the main corridors. And my dream actually, and I guess in every customer dream, is that you can very easy can buy actually ticket for container in the train as for example, as a passenger buying ticket from Paris till Beijing. It's possible, it's possible. Also for example, for these reasons, for these containers actually should be the same. And I see, and I also offer that right now is Ukraine is really open for transit possibilities. Right now, actually, if we're looking last year, there is no actually transit route with concern containers. Right now, actually, already 10 trains it's past Ukraine as such, and I see big possibilities for sure. Ukraine also should develop all negotiations questions because we should actually everybody go in one way. And thank you very much once more for this possibility to be there, and I will be also on the floor also next month on this year because really against us is I would like to say we should solve many questions and rise up all these volumes of cargo. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Edwin, and good luck to you in development of services, because actually the Ukraine is really in the heart of transportation, and I think that that surprised me that during the COVID pandemic, which is still ongoing, unfortunately, we saw quite a few initiatives coming from international organizations on cooperation, and that makes us think on maybe we could redesign the concept of international cooperation that we have right now. Maybe some of the organizations are not worth existing anymore. Maybe we should redefine the priorities. But that is, of course, not the questions that I'm going to ask right now. This is something just to think about. So we have now about 8 minutes left as a maximum, and there were several questions in the chat that I would like to transfer to all the panelists. One coming from Ms. Olesia Kochetkova, who holds a PhD in economics. And this is a question for all spokesperson. I'm going to read it out. Please reveal the primary difference between mechanisms for an organization of the system of the global interaction in their significance, randomicity, resemblance, and contradiction for the redesigning of the capacity structure for innovative development during the pandemic crisis. The question is quite complicated. Maybe somebody has got the idea on what are the available mechanisms for an organization of the system of the global interaction, and how can we prioritize and distinguish them. Me personally, I wouldn't be able to answer such questions in several minutes. This actually requires a separate PhD work, to my mind. If you have an idea, please welcome Xavier. I saw that you have already written.
Okay, I can try because I gave a short answer to this lady. You know, New Silk Road is not a dream, but it can be a dream. If we read what the President Xi Jinping said, if I remember, it was 2 or 3 years ago, it said that it must be a new bridge, it must be win-win and open for everybody. In fact, the market creates some interaction and some forces. You can understand that actually a main client for these trains is e-commerce. But e-commerce, the problematic of e-commerce is the transit time, because sea transport, it can be a problem for them. And if they want to export to Europe their main client in quick transit time, it's by aircraft, by air cargo. So it's very expensive. But if you say to e-commerce, we can develop the transit time, the quick transit time by train, but we must to invest, we must to keep a part of the revenue. They will say, no, sorry, I cannot, because my problem is the price. So there is a part of the trains of New Silk Road, which are, in fact, one expert in China said that it's toxic trains. It's a system which creates absolutely not equal development. But it's interesting, your conference today, we have an example which many people, many observers consider that there is opportunities for an interesting system. So in the New Silk Road, there is the good and the bad phase. So how we can find the good way to develop. So it's interesting that today you help us to have a view about the perspectives and the difficulties. So I cannot give an answer clearly for this question, but we know that there is 2 ways every time. And if you put in this problematic the necessary respect for the planet, for the social questions, we know that the problem is very complex, but we have no choice. We must to go step by step and to try to find the best ways. Yes.
Thank you so much for this. Was quite an uneasy answer to an uneasy question. Jean-Pierre, do you want to add something?
Maybe, I don't know if we have the time, but indeed this is a...
If you can do it in 1 minute, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. No, I want just to add something here, because the question is very complex and gives the impression that the solution could be in one organization or another. I think the solution is global, as this challenge is global. And one of the issue for this challenge is precisely, as a logistical chain, ocean to ocean, is precisely in the management of the interface between different modes. And this is where connectivity can bring the best input to harmonize the timings, the information, the big data that need to be also traveling with the goods. So management of interface is precisely becoming, as well as the question comes from a scholar, one of the disciplines of many universities in the world. And I invite actually our friend to look into. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. There is another question that I think we will not have time to answer it, but I would like to use it as a conclusion. The question comes from Ms. Tatiana Yuyukina, and the question is, I read it, what non-logistics perspective horizons can we identify for increasing countries' interaction? And here, actually, I would like to conclude, because the whole event that we have the honor to participate in today, and that actually began yesterday, and that is going to revive in other similar events. These are actually the way to interact. This is the way to find the answers to the question. And this is exactly what shows us the horizons for the future, because the future is all about cooperation. We cannot actually measure it whether we are good or bad in it. We just have to continue with that. And the ideas that we are sharing with each other are certainly to grow in the nearest future. And that exactly defines the horizon for inter-country cooperation and interaction. I would love to thank all the esteemed participants of today's session, and I have to remind you that this is not the last session for today. A lot of interesting subjects which were already touched by the participants of this session are going to be developed in the upcoming ones regarding the urban transportation, the energy transition, and many, many other interesting issues. So please stay with the International Symposium, the Post-COVID Era, Redefining and Redesigning the Global Economy. Thank you once again for your participation, for your ideas, and let us stay in touch for the future cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you for sharing the session, and for all the panelists. I think the transition between this session on connectivity will be at 2 o'clock, where we will in fact hear about mobility, where we will discuss the future of cities. And I'm pleased that Professor Moreno, the 15 minutes concept will be our keynote this afternoon. So if you have time, I look forward to seeing you again for the next session starting 2 p.m. later on. Thank you again, and thank you for all of you for joining us today. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.